Welcome to the Mental Society. I'm Amanda Dolan. In this episode, we're going to be talking about suicide. And if it feels like that's not something good for you to hear right now, hop off and we'll catch you another time. If you are feeling suicidal, I want to remind you that the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can either call or text 988, or you can find a way to chat with them and more information on their website, which is 988lifeline.org. Remember that there is help out there even when you feel completely helpless. So, this is the second of 3 episodes in a series about suicide. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience with suicide and my struggles, as well as how other suicides have directly impacted me. The first episode, we looked at suicide in the United States and some basic numbers, as well as some of my thoughts and ideas about what's causing suicide rates to increase so much here in the United States over the last 20 years. And then in the next episode, the last episode, I'm going to be talking to 2 really amazing young men who are high school students who are using computers to help ensure that people who are in need of help are finding the care that they need. And I think it is really awesome. So I think you'll really want to hear that. I know that I have shared here as well as in blogs, and if you know me in real life, all over my own social media and really to anyone that will listen about my experience with my mental health and how being suicidal was part of that. And that's really what, I guess got me to this point, is because I don't want others to struggle the way that I did for so long. I want people to keep trying to get help, because help is possible. And it's possible to feel better, even when it so often doesn't feel that way. So I'm never really sure where on some of these to begin. So I'm just going to jump right in. I think my first memory of suicide really was when I'm sure that I heard things here and there, and I know that there were things, on television and movies that alluded to suicide or outright talked about them. But I never really remember a lot about suicide. When I was, I don't know, about 14, before I went and saw my first psychiatrist, I had a suicide attempt. I took too much medication, and I really scared myself, and I went and I let my father know. Luckily, the medication that I took too much of was not something that was even going to really likely cause me any real harm. And thank goodness for that, that attempt didn't leave me with any sort of long-term physical complications, because that's not always the case. My next, well, let me back up. With that, I'm not sure that I really got any additional help when that was, where I was, that I had this attempt, and I'm not sure that anything was really done about it. Perhaps that's when I went to see the psychiatrist for the first time. I truly don't remember. One of the things that I find interesting about both bipolar and ADHD is that sometimes memory is not so great with those. And I also know personally that that period of my life was one that was really difficult, and I probably blocked a lot of that out because I don't want to remember all of that pain that I was in. The pain of my mental health, but also the pain of my father being really ill, and watching him die very slowly. the next time I really had any kind of experience with suicide, or that it was in my world, was somebody that I went to school with committed suicide. And it may have been somebody's brother that I went to school with. I don't remember exactly. They were older, and it was just kind of a thing that happened, and then we really didn't talk about it, and it went away. And then a few years later, in my class, we had a very just an amazing human. We called him Moose. His name was Mustafa. He was an exchange student. No, he was not an exchange student. I'm sorry. He had just moved from the former Yugoslavia, and obviously America was quite a culture shock for him. I know that, being in Kentucky was a very different experience for him. But we all loved him. I mean, he just had this energy about him, and there was just something, I don't even that thing you can't put your finger on about someone, that you know that they're awesome, but you don't really you can't be like, that this is what makes them awesome. You just um and that was Moose. He just, the smile he had and his laugh, and he was an amazing soccer player. We didn't really get to know all of him. But I remember when he died. I remember when he took his life, and I remember how devastating that was for so many of us. It was just, it felt like such a huge loss. And it is. But I really couldn't understand why. I knew that when I had attempted, that I was broken and sad, and that I had no hope. But Moose was just larger than life, and it didn't make sense. I didn't see it coming. I don't think any of us saw it coming. I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but it just really struck me at how much of an impact his death had. And I remember thinking, wonder if he had seen, how much he impacted all of us. If he could have seen that, if that would have changed things for him. And I don't know that it would have, maybe, but I don't know. And for me, over the next, close to 20 years, I had lots of thoughts of suicide, and sometimes they were as simple as, I don't really I don't want to live today, or I wonder what it would be like if I were gone, to things that were a little bit more concrete, and that oh, I wonder what would happen if I ran my car into that, retaining wall. And so it was, it was just something that was kind of always there. And I know that, when I was really, really sick, there were times where I really wanted to kill myself, but also I know that I used it as I would tell certain people, well, I'll just kill myself, I'll just die. And I think it was probably manipulative, although I don't know that for sure. I think I could argue that it probably was manipulative to get my way, to feel seen or heard, because I didn't. I felt, it was really just, I felt alone. And I want to make it clear that all threats of suicide are not um are not manipulation. I'm speaking only for myself, because we need to take threats of suicide seriously. Because here's the thing is, I don't think healthy people threaten suicide. I don't think healthy people think regularly about suicide. I do think that most of us at some point, like have a thought, wonder what it would be like, or, would the world be better off without me? Or, man, this just hurts so much. I want to die. And we hear people say that, and um, it's kind of normal. Like, I was so embarrassed I could have died. And I think that there's a little bit of kind of truth in the back of that, where it's like, oh my gosh, I wish that I could have disappeared. And I think maybe that's more of what we're saying when we talk about some of those things. It's like, I just want to disappear from that situation. Whereas truly wanting to end your life is so much deeper than that. I'm just done being in this world. And that can feel really big and scary when you're in it, because it is. And more than that, um, it feels like oftentimes that when you're truly suicidal, that not being in this world is not just better for you, but better for others. Um, I'll be honest that I didn't pay much attention to celebrity suicides, to, talk of suicides much in my community before my real plan came, you know, like before that. And I don't know if it was because I avoided it, or if I just didn't, notice it. Like when you drive a red car, you see all the red cars. Or if someone, tells you to look for the color blue, you're going to see blue everywhere you look. So I think that might have been part of it, was it had become part of who I was. And since I have spoken and I continue to speak openly about my mental health and my suicide plan, and how I almost wasn't here, I think I've noticed it more. And I think that, you know, celebrities committing suicide, it seems so, or for me, I mean, I've often thought, like, when I've seen a celebrity commit suicide, I'm like, but why? You have everything. Why would you not want to be here? And some of like there are three sort of specific celebrities that always come to mind for me. And the first one is Robin Williams. I grew up with him, being, just, I mean, he was an amazing comedian. He was funny, and he seemed so smart and talented, and just, always had this smile on his face. And when I heard that he had committed suicide, I was devastated. And so much of my thoughts around it were, yeah, but I mean, he's Robin Williams. He's happy. He's got money, and he's talented, and he has people that care about him. Why? Why did he end his life? Um, and I think, though, the reality is that, like, there, and it came out afterwards that there were other, medical things going on, and things that were affecting the way that his brain was working at the time. So that's some of the answers, but I don't think it's all of them. And I wish that we could understand more what's going on in every person's head just before they've made that decision. Um, and then there were two other celebrities that came kind of back to back. And it was actually while I was traveling, which I think made it more poignant in some ways. That the first was Anthony Bourdain. For me, again, like, just this larger than life person who had this job that I would have, done anything for. I got to travel and meet people and try foods and, just live what seemed to be this really incredible life. And again, he seemed to have friends and people that really cared about him. And so, when I think about that, it's like, here's this man, just like Robin Williams, right? That like seemed to have all of it together. And so, when these people have what looks like it all together, and they have all the things that you think that people want or need to be happy, money and fame and friends. And, when you see that, and then you see that this person committed suicide anyway, it can be a really difficult sort of thing. Because to me, it's like, yeah, but you had all this to live for, and all of these people cared about you, and you had, the ability to get any sort of, help that you could possibly need. And I think that, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some things around, the whys. I think people often commit suicide. But we'll get that in a minute. And then over the last year, actually less than a year, in my world that I know of, two people committed suicide, and there was one serious attempt. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were other attempts that I just didn't know about because they weren't public, or they didn't want people to know. I think that there's often some shame and a stigma still around suicide and why, and that, it might be seen as weak, or just a cry for help, being dramatic or something. And I think that it's much deeper than that. But again, with these people, that the two men that committed suicide, one was very close. His wife was one of my closest friends and had been for years. And when I heard, I was devastated for my loss, for his family's loss, for our community's loss. And, he was definitely one of those, if I, go back, he was definitely but he's not, like, he would never do that. Like, he's got all of these amazing things, and he's happy, and he's always just got this, larger than life smile and personality, and he, lights up the room. And when I found out, it just was like, no, that doesn't make sense. That it does not, like, it didn't compute in my brain. It was like, no, not him. It doesn't make sense. And I remember after his funeral, some of us went out together, and including his wife. And his wife said to myself and another friend of ours that it was her fault. But that's the thing, is like, I don't think that it's anyone's fault ever. Because there's so much that goes into that decision. Um, and then, I don't know the whys behind his suicide. And then, um, just a few weeks ago, um, a local middle school teacher who is connected with me, his mother-in-law is a friend of mine. It was when he committed suicide, it was shocking. Both, the manner in which he ended his life, but also just who this person was. I always just got the impression that he was fun and happy, and said he was a teacher and his students loved him. Um, and so again, it just was like, so why? Why are these people making these decisions? And then just this past week, a, a good friend of mine's daughter's good friend. I know that's very confusing, but she had a serious attempt, and thank goodness that did not end her life. And I don't know if it was, I don't know enough of the details to know if it was like, what so many people just a cry for help, or if it was really what she intended, or if it was, more like a self-harm sort of situation where I think with self-harm, so often it hurts so much emotionally that I just want to feel some physical pain. I want to see the pain because it's so great. Um, and I don't, I've never had any sort of like self-harm in that sense. But I can understand I hurt so much, so I want to actually feel it, um, sort of level. So with all of those, recently it's really, suicide's been more at the forefront of my mind. And then in the next episode, when I, heard about these two young men, I started thinking more about it and, digging in and doing research, and um, just a lot of it hit me big, that that was almost one of those statistics. And holy crap, there's a lot of people out there dying, and looking at, some of the, that women attempt suicide more than men, but men complete suicide more than women because of, the, some say that it's because they're more likely to use a handgun, or, really make sure, if you will, that they've planned it better, or different and better. I don't like that. They planned it differently. And that, the number of young people dying by suicide is huge. Um, and I still, so often think about, I believe it was Phil Donahue, um, who said something along the lines of, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I may have that slightly wrong, but close enough. And, I remember hearing that growing up and thinking so much like, oh, people only commit suicide, after a really bad breakup, or after someone that they love has died, or after they lost a job, that, that suicide was really a way to get out of the situation that you're currently in that's hard. Um, And that's what I told myself for so long. That's what I heard. And I also heard that, suicide, it's so selfish that, you're taking, the person that is committing suicide is taking themselves away from the world. Now, I wrote a whole, article about what this was like for me, and I'll link it in the show notes. But suicide doesn't suicide feels permanent. It feels like a permanent solution to a permanent problem. Let me explain what I mean by that. And I'm going to just use my personal experience. But I think that this can go to many others. For me, I had been suffering, been in pain for 20 years. And that felt pretty permanent. The first psychiatrist had basically, that I saw basically told me, like, you're just going to have to learn to deal with it. And then, the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth couldn't help me. And so here I am, 20 years later, still in so much pain and still so frustrated that things weren't getting better. And truly dying felt like the only way that would end, because again, for decades, I had been in that level of pain. I had felt so hopeless. And I felt helpless too. I mean, I had truly, like, no one could help me. I had seen doctors and therapists and no one could help me. And it was incredibly frustrating. And so, it makes sense that for me and for others who have experienced things like me, that we would feel like that was, what our options meant. And so if that's the case, if that's what the options were, then yeah, of course, the option is to suffer or to die. Like, I think lots of us would choose death. Like, suffering like that's not fun. And then, so for me, when I've thought about ending my life, I thought I was going to be ending this, place where I was just permanently unhappy. I was, my body would hurt and I didn't feel like I could get out of bed. And there's so much more to mental illness than just like what's happening in your brain. And then, I'm sure we've all heard like suicide is selfish. And yeah, can certainly feel that way. And again, I'm speaking for myself, and this is, I don't know what others have experienced, but for myself, I didn't feel like dying would be selfish. I didn't feel like I was taking something away from people that, needed me or needed anything I had to offer, because I was convinced that everyone would be better if I wasn't around, that, my kids wouldn't have a mom that struggled to play with them and to be present for them. And that, my friends who I could barely, stay in touch with because just contacting them was difficult. And I didn't want to lie and pretend like everything was fine. I was a prisoner in my own home. I wasn't the person that I felt anyone in the world needed. And I felt that if anything, I was harming people. And again, it was like dying, removing myself from the situation was the only way that that was going to end, that I would stop hurting and I would stop hurting others if I wasn't here. And that the only way for that to happen was for me to not be here. I'm grateful that that isn't what happened. I'm sure if you ask my kids, even though, I don't know anything now because they're teenagers and um, I'm sure I drive them crazy. Other things, I think that they would tell you that they're happy I'm here. Um, I would have missed, I don't know, countless, times singing at the top of my lungs and my kids rolling their eyes or occasionally singing along, or the dance parties in the kitchen while I'm cooking dinner that now my kids just roll their eyes at me, or some really great conversations that I've had with them, or incredible trips that we've taken and things we've experienced together. Um, and so I'm glad that I'm here. And I can see now on the other side that once I got the help that I needed, um, and I found someone that could help me, that got the answers for me that I needed so desperately, um, then there was hope. It's like, well, I can be helped. Now I have hope that I'll be better. Um, and when that suffering and that pain started to go away, um, I was able to, come out in a very different way, and that, I saw things differently, and suicide didn't feel like an option anymore. Um, but it had for quite literally decades. It had often felt like that was the best. I don't love that word, but the best choice meant that I was gonna be around. Um, and like I meant the people that were gonna, if I died, the people that were here and around, like they weren't going to be miserable anymore. And I wasn't going to be miserable anymore. So, when I think about my reasons, at least, it felt like the problem was permanent, that it wasn't going to go away. And it felt like the only solution. It also felt, dare I say, selfless. I felt like I was going to, make sure that others weren't suffering. I was taking away that burden of someone having to, care for me, that burden of, you know, my ex-husband having to take on more of the childcare responsibilities. Um, my kids wouldn't have to deal with a sad mom all the time. So it did feel selfless. And that probably seems wild to others, especially if you haven't been in that place. But what that says to me is that, you know, suicide is deeper than that, you know, temporary problem. Um, it's often something that is really like, it is deep and it needs time to heal, and need to dig into the, what's going on under the surface. Now, I will say that there are certainly people who commit suicide because there is something situational. Perhaps they, you know, were arrested for, a crime and they don't want to face, whatever that is. Or, um, they are terminally ill with something else and they don't want to suffer with that. Um, I'm sure there's also, just people that is a situational sort of thing. They've an important relationship has ended, and they're deep in that grief, and that might be something that that happens, and I'm sure it is often. Um, and I would still argue that suicide is not a quote unquote normal response to any of those things. And that means there's likely something else going on. Um, so with all of that, and what I've talked about before, suicide is complicated. Mental health is complicated. Um, and together we can make changes. Together we can talk about it and we can see what else we as a society can do to help those that are struggling with their mental health, and opening these conversations up and making it not so taboo, I think really will change things. And people won't feel so alone if they know that there's others out there that are struggling. And if those who are, survivors of their loved ones died by their own hand, I really, I know a lot of people talk about how it impacted them, but really amplify that so that, perhaps somebody that's thinking maybe the world's better off without me, they hear lots of messages that this person I loved ended their life and they're not here and my life is not better because they're gone and I miss them. And I know that that can be painful, but as with all of the mental health things that I talk about, the reason I'm doing this and the reason that I'm doing my best to be transparent about my own struggles, and sharing information with y'all, it's so people don't feel so alone and people can um, know that there's help out there, and to help people feel like they can open up a conversation about something that I think, quite frankly, is difficult for most of us to talk about. So go out, and talk to people, and um, you know, see where you can have any kind of impact. And I could keep talking about all the things. So I think that, we'll stop that discussion right there. But I would love um, to hear any of your thoughts. If you want to comment or go over to, our website and shoot me a message. I would love to hear, any of your stories, either about how you um, came out on the other side after feeling suicidal, um, a story of how someone that you love, um, their mental health has impacted you, um, or if you're struggling too, like I said, you can reach out to the 988, the suicide prevention helpline, and I promise there somebody will always answer. Um, but that leads me to our mental morsel, which is that staying connected can help our mood. When we feel connected to other people around us, it promotes positive mental health and physical health, and it can help feel like, life has more meaning. There's been some research that says human connections that include emotional conversations, support, that positive vibe, affirmation, they can all enhance our mental health. So, pay attention to those small moments that you can connect with people. Something as simple as, a text message, hey, I saw this at the store. It made me think of you, to, even just opening the door and saying, hey, have a great day. Thank you. Or whatever. Those little bits of connection can go a long way. So I encourage you today to find a way to be intentional about connecting with someone that you might not normally. And so with that, we've reached the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening and learning more about how mental health and society meet. Now go out and open a conversation. Discover the ways that mental health is being experienced in your world. You can find more of the Mental Society podcast in all the places that you find your favorite podcast. You can find additional resources and articles by visiting our website, thementalsociety.com. And remember that you are not alone in your struggles. Hope and help are all around you. Until next time, this is Amanda Dolan, wishing you good health, mental and otherwise.